Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. The 17-year-old Tyler Hadley posted an invitation on Facebook. Party at my crib tonight. But this was no ordinary house party in the Florida suburbs. It was a grisly crime scene. Later that night, Taylor revealed to his best friend Michael that he'd bludgeoned his parents to death with a hammer. Michael didn't believe him until he entered the master bedroom and saw the bodies of Tyler's parents on the floor, murdered beyond the shadow of a doubt. Mary Jo and Blake Hadley had always known their son had a dark side. He would make disturbing jokes about murder on Facebook. He apparently idolized the infamous Menendez brothers, who murdered their parents for money. But how could they have known their son was dead serious? What kind of person could kill his mother and father, throw a party with their bodies in the next room, and brag about it? This riveting account by award-winning journalist Amber Hunt takes you deep inside the mind of a troubled teenager and behind the scenes of a true American nightmare. The book that we are profiling this evening is See How Much You Love Me, a troubled teen, his devoted parents, and a cold-blooded killing, with my special guest, journalist and author, Amber Hunt. Welcome to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, Amber Hunt.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Incredible story. What brings you to this story? Give us a little bit of I think you're going to have to give us a little bit of your background, your professional journalism background, but tell us why this story, out of all the stories you could have chosen, why this story you chose to write this book.
Well, this one definitely resonated with me, but my background is I've always been a journalist, and I've always been drawn to crime in general, and so I wrote for the Detroit Free Press for about 8 years, and I covered mostly crime there, and as you can imagine, I was pretty busy, and I started to branch out a little bit and want to take deeper looks at some of the cases that I was covering, so I started with a book on a case that I covered as a daily reporter, and after that book, I started to be able to branch out and look at cases that weren't necessarily in my backyard, but were ones that I was interested in fleshing out. And this one stood out for a lot of reasons, but the psychology behind it really is what grabbed me. I mean, I don't know a teenager who doesn't get mad at their parents and maybe fantasize about them disappearing, but that doesn't mean that it's typical to go that step and do something so horrific.
Right, and the thing is too, in trying to find out information about these stories, when people say, well, they had a horrific upbringing, or they didn't have a horrific upbringing. You know, there's examples of all kinds of stories that are, run the gamut. Now, tell us, this story was compelling to you. So, what was the first thing that you did? What was the research involved, and who did you speak to originally about this case, and at what point did you come in and write about this?
Well, so I've done other books, and sometimes they've been in states with less friendly sunshine laws. My second book, for example, was a crime that happened in Virginia, and it was a nightmare. It was just so difficult. I literally wrote a book when I had maybe 20 pages of investigative material that were released, and that was really frustrating. So this one happened in Florida. The sunshine laws are much friendlier to journalists there, so I at least was able to be comfortable that when I would request something that should be public record, it was given to me. So I had just thousands of pages of stuff to go on here. So that's where I started, was with Freedom of Information Act and requesting the documents that I needed just to get a handle on what I thought the basics of the case would be before I even pitched it to my agent.
And so did you travel, and who did you first interview? What was your, like you say, you had access to information. Did you have also access to the police themselves, where often true crime writers will be able to have access to police in terms of not just the police files, not just the police reports, but actually detectives involved?
You know, they actually responded to my queries. They were very polite and professional and willing, but I'm sure that other authors you've dealt with have run into this, that there's such a rush nowadays to publish stuff that, you know, the book came out before, I had all of it written before he was convicted. So when I was trying to first do the interviews, I was doing them, you know, when the investigation was still underway. And naturally, officers are sensitive to that. They're not too keen on the idea of potentially being accused of screwing up an investigation. So they were standoffish.
Right.
But the partygoers, I was able to talk to several of those, and the most important one was Michael Mandela, who was Tyler's best friend and who ultimately was the guy that Tyler confided in the night that he killed his parents.
And a witness after the fact as well.
After the fact, yeah.
Now tell us a little bit about. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it was just he. You know, for me, he provides the heart of the book, because you know the reason I'm drawn to crime is because you have all these split-second decisions you can make in your life, and you make a wrong one, and it affects not just you and your family, but also everybody along the way in its wake. And Michael Mandela was one of the collateral victims in this case. It's really pretty sad.
Yes, absolutely. Now, this crime and this story is set in Port St Lucie in Florida. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about this and where these people go. The story also centers around Port St Lucie High School. Port St Lucie High. So tell us a little bit about Port St Lucie, kind of the character of it, and just where really it is in Florida and what it's really known for.
It's near the coast. It's a beautiful area, and I did go there and do some research in person for the book. And you know, it's one of those places that routinely would appear on lists as being one of the safest in the country. So it's a spot where people specifically go to raise their families because they feel secure. It's upper middle class. Some areas a little, you know, more basic middle class than upper. But it's a nice area, and the criticism of the area, though, is that there isn't a whole lot for kids to do, and so it definitely has a reputation of, you know, being the type of spot where a teenager gets bored, goes to a couple of parties a night. One of the town nicknames was Pot St Lucie, which as a teenager I'm sure I would have found hilarious once upon a time. But I mean, kids get bored, and it seems to have a bearing on how much they turn to drugs to entertain themselves.
Now, some kids, we were bored and we had nothing to do, but these days, kids at a certain age are also, we'll say, a little bit more spoiled than we might have been, or a little bit more. Had more experience, so they're even more bored than we. If we thought we were bored, I think these guys think they're really bored. You talked about this being an upper middle class sort of community. What about Mary Jo and Blake Hadley and Tyler? What kind of life did they have in terms of? Was it upper middle class, middle class? Was he sort of a guy that was had opportunities, or how was he spoiled? Tell us a little bit about that. His actual life there in Port St Lucie.
He was the type of kid who was, of course, fortunate to be raised in a nice house. He had nice parents. They both had steady jobs. They doted on him. And he actually was, when he was born, there were a couple complications with the pregnancy, and I found it very interesting, especially as somebody who got pregnant while writing this book. Mary Jo's devotion to her son was readily apparent from the beginning. She was always concerned that those early weeks when he was in the hospital and maybe she wasn't there to dote enough, and she was always kind of trying to make up for that. So they were spoiled in affection, and they were well off, certainly by most American standards. They were fine. They were comfortable. They weren't given a brand new car every birthday or anything like that, but they did have one that he had one he could drive, and he had plenty of freedom. He was a pretty fortunate kid overall.
Now, when I mentioned too that there was always seems to be some discrepancy or no real way to verify whether there was any abuse. Now we have this, Michael Mandela is his friend, and we have this conversation in the book, and Daniel Roberts, and whether the stories that Tyler was telling, and you can tell us about those stories, about what Tyler said about his parents and how they treated him in life at the Hadley home. So it seemed that Daniel had a little different view on this rather than Michael. Tell us what really they talked about in terms of Tyler's treatment.
Yes, that was interesting. So as Tyler's growing up, he would occasionally confide in this friend or that friend that he was in trouble with his parents and that his dad punched him in the face, and that that he came from an abusive home. The strange thing is, though, that it seems to have been completely made up, that if there was any of that going on, that there's absolutely no evidence of it, and it seems much more likely that he was painting a portrait of himself that, I don't know, maybe he thought would drum up sympathy or something. I'm not sure what the motivation would be behind that, but Michael Mandela, the friend, spent a lot of time at the Hadley household, never saw any evidence of this at all. And on top of that, Tyler wouldn't have said to Michael that this is happening, because Michael knew it wasn't true. So when this best friend would hear these stories after the fact that, maybe Tyler's parents had it coming because he was, raised so strictly, Michael was like, I don't know what you're talking about. That just didn't happen. Now,
what is Tyler considered in terms of what was his character like in terms of what his behavior was like at school? How was he considered?
No, I interviewed one teacher who had him when he was younger, and he's like, even with the prism of hindsight, there was nothing that stood out. He was a fun kid. He was nice. He was polite. He ran around. But then there are other people in the neighborhood who always felt uncomfortable about him. That they felt like he. There was an incident with one neighborhood kid, and the dad had to go and talk to the parents and say, something's not right here. Your kid's lying. I think he might have set something on fire. My memory's escaping me at the moment, but it was one of those little neighborhood skirmishes that, one parent says to the other, hey, you might want to rein him in a little. And those kinds of impressions in hindsight certainly seem much more ominous when you know what he did end up doing. Generally, though, he was just a normal kid. He had plenty of issues, but I don't know a teenager who doesn't. So he was going to a therapist at various points. He was on medication. He got in trouble at school a few times. He got in trouble for drinking, but nothing really would have been a red flag, except for those jokes that he kept telling, which again, probably plenty of kids can relate to, but it's certainly chilling in hindsight.
Right. So was there it seemed like the mother, Mary Jo, seemed to notice, or the family noticed there was sort of a difference in him in the previous year before the murders in terms of conversations or talk about suicide, and a little bit darker element that seemed to have overcome him in terms of mood, even though he was a pretty moody guy anyway. Was there seemed to be some changes in that last year that they couldn't really attribute to just growing up?
Yeah, there definitely were some changes, and it was even a bit of a roller coaster, because just before the death, Mary Jo was feeling like things were getting better. She told a couple of friends and a family member that she thought that this new therapy that he was trying was working. But before that, to get him to that point, there had definitely been some darker moments. They had considered trying to get him involuntarily committed, which in Florida is called being, they turned it into a verb, Baker acted. But the deal was that they didn't see anything imminent, so he didn't qualify, and it didn't happen. But Mary Jo was very concerned, especially because Tyler had a self-deprecation to him that was, especially now that I am a mother, I can only imagine how heartbreaking it would be to hear your kid call himself ugly and stupid and fat, and this is all stuff that Tyler did regularly, and they suspected that he might have had an eating disorder, he might have been bulimic, and so she was doing everything she could to try and get her son help. So therapy, doctor's appointments, reaching out to him, doing all the things that parents were supposed to do, she did.
Now, he's 17 during this time, and when the murders occur, it's maybe 5-6 months before he's going to be 18. When you talk about that he was getting some therapy, he was getting some medical attention, was he on any kind of medication, and what kind of medication? Antidepressant, anti-anxiety, if you can remember, and which probably wouldn't help wouldn't help the medication that he had. What kind of drugs was he using? What kind of street drugs was he using other than marijuana, if it were anything other than marijuana?
Well, the police, when they searched the home, they found the bodies, obviously. They also found prescriptions. There were a couple of antidepressants there. And then there also was a history of human growth hormones that Tyler had been on because he wanted to be as tall as his dad, so his parents had put him on some medication that he really wanted because he was afraid he was going to be too short. I can't really wrap my head around that one, but
no.
Especially because there are side effects to that are certainly risky, especially when you start mixing them in with other medications. But I don't know if he ever took those at the same time. I don't know if he was prescribed an antidepressant that he refused to take. All I know is that they found him in the home, that somebody thought he should be on it, So, it's tough to know what played a role in that. But then on top of that, there were big recreational drugs. He drank. There were a lot of there was a lot of ecstasy. There was a lot of pot, and pot and ecstasy on their own aren't known to cause many problems, but when you start mixing in prescriptions, things get much hazier.
Now, he's also known as sort of, in terms of parties, and I wanted to ask you this too because I think I got this from the book too, that it's always been important that you could host a party at your house. You would be kind of cool, and then there was those times when people just tore the guy's house apart. How important were parties to these kids? And in terms of Tyler having a party, tell us about his history of parties.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting because he didn't have a whole huge history with parties, but for some reason he got it in his head that, damn, I need to throw a party. And it was important to him. It was important enough apparently to kill. It's again hard for me to fully fathom, but yeah, he wasn't a big party goer. He wasn't the type who had one every weekend, but he decided he needed to have this one, so he posted it on Facebook, hit me up, come on over, and it became very important to him.
Now let's just go back just a little bit because we haven't spoken about Tyler's brother. So tell us about Tyler's brother and what happens a few months before in this, up to these murders. Tell us what happens with the brother because it's important a little bit later on.
Right. So the brother's a few years older, 7 years older, and they lived together for a long time. He stayed with their parents while Tyler was there. But just a few months before this all happened, he moved away to North Carolina to live with his girlfriend, and he had a job lined up. So the dynamic of the house changed right before this happened.
What was the relationship between Tyler and his older brother?
They got along well, but it was a little strained in that his brother didn't tend to think that he was honest with him. So, he would ask about a girlfriend, and Tyler would tell his brother, oh, yeah, I'm seeing somebody, and then deny it to his parents or vice versa. And it just seemed like there was always a wall up between the two of them. And in fact, when police interviewed him, he said that Tyler was a pathological liar.
Right. Now, just before, the last couple days before this July 16th, 2011, tell us what Tyler was like, what the situation was like at the home. Was there any incidents in the last 2-3 days? What was it like in the last few days prior to this? And was there, not that there can be any reason or rationale, but something about a phone. So what was the status and what was he doing and what was the sort of the atmosphere days before or that few days prior to this?
Well, pretty soon before, he actually, things were going pretty well. He had told, he told his mom that he was wanting to go on a family vacation with his dad, which his mom was torn about because the doctors at the therapy, he was basically going into therapy on an outpatient basis daily. And they said that it probably wouldn't be a great idea to pause this right now, so why don't we just keep going? But Mary Jo thought that it would be healthy for Tyler and his dad to go away together. So they did, and things were a little weird on that trip. There were times when the relatives who were also there, they were basically in a cabin in the woods, and Tyler would be staring at them from outside, or he would grab a stick and suddenly start hitting things with it, and like a toddler, they'd have to take the stick away from him. But generally, they all reported that they mostly had a good time, and Tyler seemed okay, disturbed as teenagers sometimes do, but generally okay. And then immediately before, Tyler had gotten in trouble for drinking, and he had his phone taken away from him. So he didn't have a phone, and apparently that was quite bothersome. So he, when he posted his first hit me up message on Facebook saying he was going to have a party, his closest friends recognized that the phone number he posted wasn't his own phone number, but rather his father's phone number. As far as rationale goes for what happened, I mean, I don't know of a lot of people who react to having a phone taken away with murder, so it doesn't quite add up. But there did seem to be, some disciplinary action in the house that happened before the incident.
Yeah, yeah. So what happens that day? So earlier in the day, he's talking about at 1:15 he posts this party at my crib, maybe. So what's happening just before that, and his announcement, and how do people respond to this party at my crib, maybe? What do they think, his close friends?
They're down with it. As somebody with even just a bit of education, I had a hard time deciphering the responses because apparently it's in some team speak that it took me about 16 years to find the code for, but it was all basically like, yes, that sounds awesome. So
yeah.
So they were definitely interested. It's how St Lucie kids spend their time. Meanwhile, Blake and Mary Jo were away for the afternoon. They went. There's a receipt showing them at a McDonald's at a certain point, and Tyler was at home, and he ended up, his buddy Michael Mandela and Mike's girlfriend and another guy stopped by the house, and they were all kind of hanging out, and things got a little strange because Michael's car had broken down, and he decided he wasn't supposed to be hanging out with Tyler. He was himself in a little bit of legal trouble, so he was supposed to just drive to and from work, but he didn't detoured. And so anyway, he decided he needed to leave, and he couldn't afford to take the third friend home, and that friend ended up staying at Tyler's house and was expecting to meet his parents. But as soon as the parents pulled into the driveway, Tyler panicked, told him to run, just shoot him out the door. I mean, and they both started bolting. And so the guy he ran away in a panic. He didn't know why.
I found it interesting.
He had been one of the kids who Tyler had told, my parents are jerks. And so the kid was like, well, I don't want to meet them. And then so he starts getting more comfortable with the idea because he says to Michael, wait, I thought his parents, beat him. I thought they were terrible. And Michael's like, no, well, that's ridiculous. They're just parents. So then he's thinking, okay, this is all right. I'll meet them. It'll be fine. And then the next thing you know, he's being shooed at the door.
Yeah, so, that's Daniel Roberts. I found that Tyler must have been fairly convincing around some of the other friends and at school, because a guy like Daniel Roberts had to get the message from Michael Mandela, who really knew the family and said, no, these are nice people. And then you have that Daniel looks around and goes, well, you got a car, you got a laptop, you got $700 bucks in your wallet. Wow, that's not so hard done by. A pool in the backyard.
This is a nice house, and Tyler just shakes it off. Now this isn't nice. Your house is nice. This is crap.
Yeah, poor guy. And so now, how long is it before he's sending more text messages to his friends? And what's the messages now? How have they changed?
They start to become much more definite. Definitely a party tonight. And when you have the benefit of hindsight and you look at the timeline, you realize that the maybe was before the death, and the definitely we're partying tonight is after the death. And people did start showing up, and he had been in a mad rush to clean up the crime scene, and wasn't even there to open the door immediately. For the people who were starting to gather on the lawn.
Wasn't there a text as well as what if your parents come home? And he said, well, they won't.
These are Facebook messages, right?
Right.
So these are, you send a Facebook message, it pops up, and one of the kids said, hey, what about your parents? And he jokes that he's going to kill them, and they've heard this joke before, so they just kind of play along, and one of the kids says, well, if you do that, can I have your car? And, it's just party ha-ha the whole time, and we even offered to take care of the mom, if I remember right. But it's, kind of hard to believe.
Yeah. So tell us what he did, because you really capture that in the book. That his, I can't even say. Just tell us what he does and how long he hangs around, and
right.
Just tell us about the crime.
Just
to tell about them.
Yeah. This was particularly disturbing, and partly because he confided in some cellmates, and that's where a good portion of the description comes from. But it's certainly chilling. So and this is, my little pre-citation here is this is according to the people he spoke with at the jailhouse. This is piecing together a bunch of different sources. So he decided he was going to kill them. Apparently he had considered a variety of different weapons. He ended up grabbing a framing hammer. He's got this 22-inch hammer, and his mom was in their living room working on her computer. It's basically like a communal computer in the dining room, living room type area. And he was standing behind her, and he had the hammer in his hand, and he stood there for, he described it as, 5 minutes, just staring at her head and gearing up to do this. And he had the hammer in his hand, and finally he swung. And she spins around and says, why? And he says, why the F not? And just keeps swinging. And it would have been pretty soon after that their father, Blake, came out of the adjacent bedroom. And, it's hard to imagine what that might be like as a father, a 6'4" giant of a man. But he apparently froze. He was next. So Tyler turned on him, and he was also killed. And from his descriptions, it was just, and not only that, but the medical examiner report. It's just a flurry of violence. It's just swinging both sides of the hammer and incredible amount of damage.
Now they're in the master bedroom, both the parents.
The mom was in the living room. The dad would have been coming out of the bedroom, and so he would have had to get his mom into the bedroom because they're adjacent, but it's not exactly the same. So he had to drag her in there.
So what does he do with the bodies, and what does he do to cover up that evidence itself?
Yeah. He wraps their heads in towels and then just begins to pile all kinds of crap on top of the bodies. Like he's running around the house, getting paintings off the wall, getting, chairs out of the kitchen, and he's just tossing it into the master bedroom. So they're buried underneath this pile of crap. And then he starts to clean up the main part of the house. And when guests start to arrive, they notice that there are nails on the walls, but there are no family photos. There's nothing there, so it looks bare and weird. But they figure maybe he just didn't want his stuff broken, so he piled it all somewhere. They didn't know that he had piled it all on top of his dead parents in a bedroom.
Right. And so he spread the word adequately, and so soon enough a fair amount of people come, including Michael Mandela, and Daniel Roberts comes back. Tell us a little bit about the friends that come around, and How long does it take before this party really starts happening?
Well, there ended up being about 60 people at the party, so word definitely spread, and it spread pretty quickly. The kids just, I guess, didn't have much better to do, so they showed up, and plenty of them didn't even know Tyler, or only knew of him, or showed up because a friend was going, and then so they got there, and music's playing, and Tyler was, I guess, a pretty friendly host, although he took basically his closest friends and went into his bedroom and just smoked and drank in there. So there were all these people wandering around the house, and it went on for hours. It was a late party, so it was it was pretty happening there for a while.
And at first he didn't want, being conscientious, he didn't want anybody smoking in the house. But then it seemed like he didn't mind because he wanted to keep the people off of the front lawn and away from potentially the cops coming, he said.
Yeah, there was definitely an effort to keep things under wraps. So at some point the police actually did show up because of a noise complaint. That was later in the night, but generally he was trying to keep things calm, and he also was strangely concerned about things getting broken, and one of his friends ended up sort of behaving like a bouncer, going around trying to make sure that things didn't shatter and so forth. But as it all progressed, and he began to confide in some people what he had done, which was a sort of slow revelation. The tone of the party changed a bit.
And what does he tell his first friend? What does he reveal to that friend, and what's their response?
Well, when he told Michael Mandela, Michael didn't believe him. So at first he said, I did it. I killed my parents. And Michael said, bull crap. No, you didn't. That's ridiculous. I'm trying not to swear, by the way. These are kids, so they said things quite different than.
Sure.
He said that, no, you didn't. Quit playing. And Tyler had to come back to him a couple of times to convince him that it actually happened. So first he said, no, seriously, look, my folks' cars are still in the driveway. Don't you think that's weird? And Michael shrugged that off. And so eventually he told him to look around the house for clues, that he would see them. And sure enough, Michael starts paying attention, and he notices that area where Mary Jo had been sitting near the computer. There's an awful lot of brownish goo on the floor that could be blood. Yeah, and then Michael goes around the back of the house because the bedroom was attached to the living area, but it also had a separate entrance from the back of the house, so you could get into the bedroom from outside. So he pushes the door open and notices a leg, and the leg is bloody, and he recognizes the stock as being flakes and realizes, oh crap, this is actually a real thing that's happened. And there were a couple other comments that Tyler made to people. He told a girl at the party that his dad had died, and she kind of shrugged it off, thinking he meant like long ago, but in reality it was just a few hours prior. And he made a couple comments to the people that he'd be going away for a long time, more than 60 years. And then also he told Michael that he was planning on taking a whole bunch of pills, and he was going to kill himself. But Michael saw the pocket of, or the baggie of pills hanging out of Tyler's pocket, so he grabbed them. So he had dispersed those before Tyler even noticed they were missing.
Now, so everyone's oblivious, and they're just carrying on their way at this party, eating all the food and listening to music, and pretty well converging on this place and taking it over. At some point, they leave because they hear there's another party. What is his reaction, and then what happens? Tell us about that?
But he was sort of an MIA host for a lot of the time anyway, because he was in his room with his select group of people. But as some people started trickling out, it seemed like a bomb was thrown. So he tried to talk a few of them into staying, and Michael at this point was getting particularly unnerved and was well aware that plenty of people at the party were not supposed to be around crime scenes because they had papers themselves. They had, they were supposed to keep their noses clean as part of their parole. And so he was trying to get some of them to leave. And one guy in particular was like, no, I'm going to stay. I'm going to help him clean up, because he's a good friend. Of course, you help clean up. But finally, Michael convinced him that there were dead bodies in the house. So he decided maybe he should go after all.
But at the same time, he didn't want to really alert his friends, so they mugged for some photos.
Well,
they took some photos together, didn't they?
That was with Michael, but Michael did know at that point. Michael, he had told Michael,
okay.
And Mike said, he said, well, if you're going away, I guess I should take a picture. And Tyler said, yeah, I take a lot of pictures. And so there's this very eerie snapshot of Mike, who knows what's going on, and Tyler, who's done what he's done, and they're both, standing there in a selfie, and Tyler's holding a silo cup and solo, and they've got their beer, and yeah, strange.
So when does this nightmare end? When does this party end, and who goes to police? Who and what do they say to police?
Well, there was the noise complaint first. So the police had shown up for that, but Tyler assured them everything would calm down, and it did. So then after the next party, word of that spreads and people leave. There were actually two separate phone calls to police. One was Michael Mandela, who called Crime Stoppers. That he was trying to cover his tracks a bit. He really didn't want to rat, so he called a different jurisdiction and left the information with Crime Stoppers there, and that was quickly passed along to the Port St Lucie police. And then another friend had heard just a rumor at the party, and he called up with his girlfriend, and he was sort of like, this probably isn't true, but you should maybe check it out because there's this rumor. He said he killed his parents, So police got tips from these two different places, and when officers arrived at the house, they immediately sensed something was amiss. The cars were in the driveway, and they could see Tyler through the window, and he was looking very agitated, and he seemed to be talking to himself and going from one room to another, and so they knocked, and when things didn't add up and they started to question, him, they had their probable cause, and he was arrested pretty soon after.
So what happens next?
Next is, a flurry of media attention and court appearances and people trying to make sense of, the senseless. So he was taken to Rock Road, which is, the nickname for the jail there because it's situated on Rock Road. So he's taken there and he's questioned, and family members are called in and questioned. And when the police, went into the house, it didn't take long for them to recognize the same signs that Mike had noticed earlier. They see and they're trained to see a little more clearly, so they see the dry blood. on the floor, and they see blood spatter on the ceilings. And when they finally go into the bedroom, which he, insists that they not go into, it's just a horror show in there. So the bodies were discovered pretty quickly.
What's his demeanor once he gets into custody? What is he? How does he act?
He didn't do anything particularly noteworthy. He actually didn't say a whole lot. The interviews he had with police, he asked for a vanilla Coke and then asked for a lawyer. So he just didn't talk a lot. Seemed like he had seen enough TV shows to know what's right.
Yeah. So he's 6 months, like I'd said before, around 5 to 6 months before he's 18. So that makes him ineligible for the death penalty, but not automatically. Was that the case?
It actually changed during the course of the investigation. When he was arrested, it was that there would be an automatic. If you're 18 and you kill somebody and you're convicted, it's automatic. And if you're shy of that, the Supreme Court, after the death, ruled that it's cruel and unusual punishment to get the death penalty if you're a minor.
Right.
So that was very disappointing to some of the prosecutors, that's for sure.
Now, we won't go and give away, because I don't want to give away some really great parts of your book, and the trial isn't a foregone conclusion, because this doesn't always happen. But what is his defense, though? I mean, really, it's not a capital case anymore, so he doesn't have to deal with that. So how does his defense try to defend him? On what grounds?
Well, he had taken some ecstasy before the death, so they were trying to pin it on that, and his mental health in general. So that immediately popped up. And I'm sure from other, author interviews he's done, it's very rare that those work. The not guilty by reason of insanity, but that definitely came up early as a possible defense.
Mm-hmm. And at least there'll be a mitigating factor later in sentencing too, once it's brought into evidence and accepted as evidence.
Right.
Would that be correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now he doesn't get. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's interesting because among the cache of documents I got were jailhouse letters that he wrote to friends and to family members, and he talked a lot about having something in his defense that would get him off the hook. He also would talk about how he could handle 20 or 30 years, but I couldn't do life, and so he seemed to be very concerned with what the sentence was going to be.
And you also we did talk about the informant that was crucial to the trial. I won't give that all away, but he has a nickname in jail. And what did he refer and sign autographs as, which would indicate really his state of mind afterwards?
Hammer Boy. He would sign newspaper clippings and such. It's hammer time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a sad case, very incredible. And, the thing is too, that, like you say, the collateral damage is his friend that was brought in, sucked into this thing that really shouldn't be responsible, but really one way or another is brought into this and dragged through everything. And tell us a little bit about that, because it really is, without the truth really comes out through him. But what is the damage to him in terms of legally and otherwise?
Well, he's already had some run-ins with police. He was kind of a troubled kid to begin with, but he had his friend, and he was pretty idealistic, and he was trying to get things straightened out. And his dad was an alcoholic, and so he was very aware of the need to get things sorted. And he was on his way to doing it. And then this happened, and he's not only, faced with losing a friend, which, is what happened. I mean, he had this very close friend for years, and all of a sudden that's stripped away from him. But on top of that, he had to come to grips with knowing that the friend confided in him, so it was this huge weight on him, knowing that the friend was capable of doing something so unbelievably horrific to people that, Mike considered parent figures. He really liked Blake and Mary Jo. They were family to him, and they were not just killed, but killed in this horrible, gruesome way. And, it wasn't long after that, police started to question how much he knew and when he knew it, and Mike kind of got fed up with it, and so then he's butting heads because he's not wanting to answer questions anymore. He just wants to try and move on with his life, and he just didn't seem to catch a break. So he was running into trouble with police who thought he was holding things back, and then his mom died not long after all of this, and it's just, it's a terrible situation for an otherwise good kid.
Now, again, I don't want to give too much away, so don't give too much away. But what does the brother have to say after all of this?
The brother has stayed. I've been very respectful of the family for a lot of reasons. First off, I can't remotely imagine what this is like, and I reached out, of course, to multiple family members, and they didn't want to rehash more. And his brother was among them, and I know from letters and from transcripts when he visited in jail that he made it very clear to Tyler that he loves him, but that it's not okay what he did. And I know that sounds like silly, of course he does, but I can't, he lost both his parents and his brother that night, and at his brother's hands, and he's left to carry on with this incredible weight. But he's, moving on, and I believe he's still with his girlfriend, and he's got a strong family support system, what's left of it, and he's from all accounts doing the best he can.
Now, out of this, what I kind of read in the book, and I'm a little bit older, but I'm no innocent, and I don't think you are either. What you kind of portray in the book, and maybe I'm getting it wrong, is it seemed that there is a sort of a casualness, though, to everybody at this party and people around him when he talked about suicide, or if he talked about killing his parents, and it just seemed a very casualness, no matter what anyone said, or the blood is, this oozing gunk is underneath the computer, but no one cares. You need a laptop for some tunes. So did I kind of get from that there seemed to be an overly casual attitude, it seemed, by these kids?
I think that's fair. I think the average person, if joke after joke were made straight-faced about killing your parents, that maybe somebody would say, it's not that funny. But this group did not at all seem to call him on that. So there was definitely a disconnect, and I guess I don't think it's a generational thing I think that's fair that was weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, nice. I thought that's what I got from that.
Yeah, and there's a mess around the house, and there's granted, people might not see bluish or brownish goo and realize that it's blood, but it didn't seem to make an impression at all. Like, they just didn't seem to. It just didn't register.
Yeah, it seems
I don't know what kind of environment they're raised in that brownish goo on the floor wouldn't raise a red flag of some sort.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think all the things that happened, it seemed that he's hinting, he's telling certain people, he's alluding to a few things, and still the party goes on. It seems oblivious. So that's quite fascinating. And this is a fascinating story. You've been listening to See How Much You Love Me. This is not your only true crime book, so tell us what other true crime titles that you do have, and for those people that may want to contact you or connect with you, how might they do that?
Mm-hmm. My first book was Dead But Not Forgotten, and that was on a cold case that was resurrected in Michigan. And the second book I wrote was All American Murder, and that one was about the University of Virginia lacrosse slang. This is when the male lacrosse player killed his girlfriend. That was a heartbreaker of a different sort. And I actually have another book coming out in December that is not crime. It's called The Kennedy Why, that I'm really proud of, partly because I didn't have to read any autopsy reports to do that book, which was a really nice change of pace. And my dad will be able to read the other one and not worry for my soul. So that's nice too. But I'm on Twitter. I'm at Reporter Amber, and I have a website, Author Amber Hunt. But I love chatting and would be happy to hear from people.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much, and we'll hope to talk to you again soon. Maybe we'll have you back on and talk about All-American Murder and that very interesting case. So I want to thank you very much for coming on and taking your valuable time. I know that you're hard-pressed for time, so I really appreciate it, and I'm sure the audience did as well. I want to thank you very much, Amber.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a great night, Amber. Good night.
You too. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good night.